Very well. Good morning, Council.
Morning. Morning.
Any matters to take up?
None here.
Mr. Segura. Very well, Mr. Thompson. You may continue your cross-examination. Let me remind Professor Segura, you're still under oath.
Yes, Your Honor.
You understand the oath you took yesterday applies to this testimony as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very well.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
4 binders.
Just one, Your Honor. And Professor Segura, I'd like to now talk a bit about you, ask you questions about the political assets available to the LGBT community in the Prop 8 campaign. And let me start by asking, Senator Dianne Feinstein publicly advocated the defeat of Proposition 8. Is that right?
It was my understanding that she was opposed to it, yes.
And she's popular in California. Is that correct?
That waxes and wanes, but I think she won comfortably in her last bid for re-election.
And it was a political asset for the LGBT community to have her willing to speak on its behalf. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Senator Barbara Boxer opposed Proposition 8, correct?
That's my understanding.
Governor Schwarzenegger opposed Proposition 8, correct?
That's my understanding, but with the footnote that the governor also twice vetoed same-sex marriage. So there's other actions to consider.
He vetoed it on the ground that it would be illegal under Prop 22.
I don't know what his justification was in doing so.
Attorney General Brown opposed Proposition 8, correct?
I'm not sure of that because I don't recall, and I wasn't that aware of what the elected officials were doing. But that strikes me as consistent with his positions.
Can you identify any statewide official who advocated on behalf of passage of Proposition 8?
Again, there may have been one or more. I don't know, but I don't have any off the top of my head.
President Obama opposed Proposition 8, correct?
That's correct, but with the important footnote. So the president, during his campaign, repeatedly stated that he believed marriage was between one man and one woman, and his voice was used in contacting and messaging around that idea. So I would also say that his opposition to Prop 8 was not particularly vociferously repeatedly. Nevertheless, I think it's in his position that he is opposed to that proposition.
Do you think the use of President Obama's words, the speech you're referring to was at Saddleback Church with Rick Warren, where he said marriage is between a man and a woman?
I'm not sure where the snippet was captured. He said it was on more than one. He said that on more than one occasion. But what's the question?
Well, the question then is, wherever he said it, his words were used by the Yes on 8 campaign, correct?
I think they were used by someone engaged in mobilization around the issue. I don't know if it was coordinated with the Yes on 8 campaign or not.
Do you think that that was an effective political strategy to use President Obama's words in that way?
I don't think that would be an effective strategy because it would serve to send a misleading signal that perhaps that the then candidate was in favor of the proposition, or to at the very least confuse the issue.
Now, President Bill Clinton advocated publicly for the defeat of Proposition 8, correct?
That's my understanding.
And he's a popular political figure in California?
Well, I'm not sure that that's still true, but I think that was probably true at the time of the campaign.
And were there any former presidents who advocated the passage of Proposition 8?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Well, now I'd like you to turn to tab 54 in your binder, and this is a press release dated September 26th, 2008, produced to us by the Equality California. It's entitled, Levi Strauss & Company joins PG&E as co-chair of No on Prop 8 Equality Business Council. And the first paragraph says, Levi Strauss & Company, one of the oldest and most prestigious clothing and apparel companies in the world today, joined PG&E as co-chair of the No on 8 campaign Equality Business Council. Do you know how much Levi Strauss donated to the campaign?
I don't.
Your Honor, we'd move the admission DIX 2500.
No objection, Your Honor.
DIX 2500 is admitted.
Turning your attention, Professor Segura, to the next tab, 55. This is a press release from Equality California, dated July 29th, 2009. And the first sentence reads, "Our efforts to protect the fundamental freedom to marry received a power boost from Pacific Gas and Electric Company to the tune of $250,000. Do you know of any contribution of like size to the Yes on 8 campaign from a corporation?"
A former corporation, no.
Your Honor, we would move the admission of DIX 2472.
No objection, Your Honor.
Very well. 2472 is admitted.
And this, was this a political asset for the LGBT community to have major corporations like Levi Strauss and PG&E supporting the No on 8 campaign?
I would agree that the dollars were political asset. I am less moved by the notion that Pacific Gas and Electric sways many voters.
Now, in terms of celebrities, they can sway voters, correct?
That remains an open question, but I think there is certainly an argument to be made on that behalf.
Okay, and many celebrities opposed Proposition 8, correct?
I would say that's a fair statement.
Ellen DeGeneres opposed Proposition 8, correct?
Ellen DeGeneres did oppose Proposition 8, but of course, it's well known to most of the people in that courtroom that she's also an affected party. So you could conceivably think that she was opposing it on the basis of her membership in the class that's affected.
And Brad Pitt opposed Proposition 8.
Again, I don't know the details of that, but if you present that to me, I have no reason to doubt that.
Do you know of any celebrities who supported the passage of Proposition 8?
I don't off the top of my head, so I'll begin with that. But there's a number of celebrities in this society who have fairly conservative social and political beliefs. And it would not surprise me that one or more celebrities did favor the passage on Prop 8. But to draw a name upon, I'm afraid I can't at this moment of instant recall.
And you don't know of any celebrity who publicly went out and campaigned for Proposition 8, correct?
Same answer, I don't know.
Now, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about the political opportunity structure. You testified yesterday about analyzing the forces arrayed against a group, and we talked about religious organizations yesterday. So I want to now ask you some questions about progressive religious organizations. And there were a number of religious organizations that have expressed support for the lesbian and gay cause of marriage equality, correct?
That is correct. There are a number of smaller denominations who hold a more positive view of lesbians and gays. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to turn your attention to tab 56. This is an amicus brief filed in on the in-remarriage cases in the California Supreme Court. And if you look, turn to page 53 of the brief, which is the last page that has numbers, and then flip one more beyond that to the table which is entitled List of Amici Curiae. Do you see that, Professor? And isn't it true that there were literally hundreds of communities of faith, churches, temples, synagogues, and religious leaders who supported the right of same-sex marriage, correct?
As I expressed in my rebuttal report to Professor Nathanson's deposition, Mr. Thompson, there's a bit of intellectual dishonesty in presenting the summation of hundreds of communities of faith. What we have to do in order to evaluate the distribution of religious beliefs and religious sects on the question of whether or not they supported or opposed same-sex marriage or Proposition 8 is to look at the relative size of those groups. So, for example, the individuals who filed the amicus curiae brief included the individual organizations, included the Unitarian Universalists, the United Church of Christ, the Metropolitan Community Church, and Reformed Congregations of Judaism. Collectively, they represent approximately 2% of the American public. And by contrast, the Roman Catholic Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Southern Baptists, and several of the others collectively represent over a third of the American population. So when we say that there are hundreds of congregations that would have supported same-sex marriage or opposed Proposition 8, that is true. But it needs to be arrayed against the literally thousands of congregations who opposed.
And there were Lutheran churches that opposed, correct?
I'm sure there were some.
And Episcopal churches that opposed.
The Episcopal Church, is my understanding, they took no formal position.
The 6 bishops took a position, did they not?
The positions may have stated, but the church, I think, formally does not adopt public positions.
And there were certainly Episcopal parishes that supported the right of same-sex marriage, correct?
Just as there were Episcopal parishes who have threatened to leave the Episcopal Church over their ordination of homosexuals. Just as there are Episcopal churches who have threatened to leave the Episcopal communion over the ordination of homosexuals.
What percentage of the American public are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
It's very small, approximately 2 or 3%.
Okay. Now, I'd like to direct your attention to tab 57. And this is a document from the Council of Churches, Santa Clara County. And it's DIX 366. In the first paragraph, it says, "The Council is proud to call your attention to the ad running in the San Jose Mercury News, signed by 25 local churches. And it's true, Professor Segura, that there was religious opposition to Prop 8 that took the form of ads in newspapers, correct?"
Yes.
Your Honor, we would move the admission of DIX 366.
No objection, Your Honor.
Very well.
I'm turning your attention to the next tab in your binder, 58, which is DIX 312. This is a document from the Neighborhood Unitarian Universalist Church of Pasadena. And on the first page, the second bullet point says, "No on Prop 8 rally today." And it describes a rally that was going to be held. And it's true that there were rallies by religious organizations that opposed Proposition 8, correct?
That is true. Again, I want to consider the rallies in favor of Proposition 8 and the relative size of the crowds at each.
And Your Honor, we would move the admission of DIX 312.
Very well. I assume there was no objection.
No objection.
Turning your attention to the next tab in your binder, 59. This is entitled, "UCC Church Takes a Stand Against California's Proposition 8." And it relates to the First Congregational Church of Berkeley. It's DIX 417. And in the first page, in the third paragraph, it states, "In addition to formally voting to oppose the initiative, FCCB, which is First Congregational Church of Berkeley, has been actively working to defeat Proposition 8 for several months. The church formed a marriage equality ministry team and now hosts weekly phone banks to reach out to undecided voters and to deliver the message of fairness and equality to all our neighbors." And it's true that religious opposition to Prop 8 took the form of phone banking in some instances, correct?
In some instances, I would again assume that that's true and have no reason to doubt the veracity of the United Church of Christ's claim. I would once again want to elaborate that the United Church of Christ is only approximately, it's even less than 1% of the American population. And that a church in Berkeley was opposed to Proposition 8, the mind reels. But I'm not terribly surprised.
All right. Your Honor, we would move the admission of DIX 417.
No objection.
Very well.
Turning to tab 60, this is a newsletter from the St. Francis Lutheran Church. It's DIX 388. And turning your attention to page 5 on this document, right underneath the photo, it says, "St. Francis accepting donations to No on 8 campaign." And it says, "Church Council met last Tuesday and agreed to accept donations on behalf of No on 8. So there were efforts to raise money through churches for the No on 8 campaign, correct?
Again, with my aforementioned qualification, yes.
Your Honor, we move the admission of DIX 388.
No objection.
388 is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Turning your attention, Professor Segura, to tab 61, which is DIX 325. This is the annual meeting of the Unitarian Universalist Church, and I would like to direct your attention to page 52. And in the second paragraph, it makes reference to the UULM, which is the Unitarian Universalist Legislative Ministry, and it starts, "The UULM Action Network, PAC, stepped forward to manage the statewide interfaith organizing to defeat Proposition 8, raising funds from UUs Lutherans, and Congregationalists, hiring interfaith organizers and coordinating the mobilization of people of faith throughout California. So, there was an effort by churches who opposed Proposition 8 to manage a statewide organization, correct?
I can agree that that's what represented in this paragraph suggests that there was an effort of coordination among the small churches who were supportive of same-sex marriage rights. The paragraph actually doesn't provide me with sufficient evidence to evaluate the strength or organizational complexity. I just don't know.
Your Honor, we would move the admission of DIX 325.
No objection.
Very well, 325 is admitted.
Turning your attention to the next tab in your binder, 62. This is DIX 343. It's a press release from the United Methodist Church, and it's entitled Faith Leaders from Across State to Speak Out Against Proposition 8. It's dated October 8th, 2008. If we look at the first page, it may be easier if you just flip one, since the sticker was covering some of the language. So it says, clergy and faith leaders from across California will hold interfaith gatherings this weekend to stand against Proposition 8. People of faith are coming together and speaking out. Then a couple of sentences down, it adds, events will be held on Saturday in Los Angeles, Long Beach, San Diego, Redlands, Sacramento, San Francisco. On Sunday, interfaith services will be held in Costa Mesa, Santa Rosa, and San Jose. So, there's a widespread geographic effort to have interfaith services to oppose Proposition 8, correct?
Once again, I can't speak to the attendance of these or to the relative size vis-a-vis the rallies and services on the opposing side. But yes, there were services held in broad geographic distribution.
Your Honor, we would move the admission of DIX 343.
No objection.
Very well. Oh, any way to kind of move this along, Mr. Thompson?
We are moving, Your Honor, as quickly as I can.
All right, it does seem just a tad repetitive.
We're almost done with this subject, Your Honor.
All right.
I think I have one more document. And this is the tab 63. This is DIX 428. This is a document from the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. And directing your attention to the first page, which is the fourth page of the exhibit, but it has a page 1 at the bottom. And at the left-hand column, last paragraph, it says, some of the most groundbreaking support of pro-LGBTQIA equality is among people of faith, religious figures such as Bishop Gene Robinson, Reverends Phil and James Lawson, Bishop Yvette Flunder, the majority of the rabbinical leadership in California, all of the Episcopal bishops of California, and countless other religious leaders spoke publicly on behalf of the LGBTQIA community and received media coverage for it. And that's a true statement to the best of your knowledge, correct?
Mr. Thompson, I have no reason to suspect that that statement is not true, nor would I suspect that the statements directly above that one in the exact same column are not true. Quoting, in particular, analyzing the role of the pro-LGBTQIA religious organizing has become critical, given that weekly religious participation was significantly correlated with support for Proposition 8. Stated another way, the pro-LGBTQIA movement has a problem with religion. So I want to make sure that we read these documents in their entirety and understand their true meaning.
Now, Your Honor, we would move the admission of DIX 428.
No objection.
Very well, 428 is admitted.
All right, now, let's move on to another subject. You talk about, Professor, one aspect of the political opportunity structure is the degree of dislike for a group, correct?
That's correct.
None of the warmness readings, temperature readings that you referenced during direct related to California, correct?
They're related to the national electorate.
Yes, and there are more gays and lesbians in California than in any other state, correct?
There's more of everything in California than in every other state.
That's true.
One out of every 8 Americans live in California.
But there's a higher concentration on a per capita basis. It's not just an absolute, it's a relative. the highest percentage of people in any state that are gay and lesbian reside in California, correct?
Those numbers fluctuate, so I don't know for an absolute certainty that that is true, but it's certainly plausible and, in fact, even likely.
All right. Now, as a practical matter, part of the explanation for that is some gays and lesbians move to California because it is a hospitable climate for gays and lesbians, correct?
I would say it is more hospitable climate for gays and lesbians than the one they left.
And there are more civil rights protections in California for gays and lesbians than in any other state, correct?
That would appear to be the case. The absence of civil rights protections in many states remains a problem for gays and lesbians.
Now, one of the protections is the domestic partnership law. It is reasonable to conclude that many gays and lesbians in California supported domestic partnership laws in 2005?
Supported them as opposed to no option, then I would say the answer would be yes. I would perhaps not be willing to say that that was their first preference for outcome, but what the opposition was, no state recognition or domestic partnership, I think it would be fair to say that most gays and lesbians would support such a thing.
Now, let's skip ahead in your binder to tab 69, and this is DIX 1068. It's a press release from Equality, California. And if you turn to the second paragraph, the last sentence is a quote from Jeffrey Coors, Executive Director of Equality, California. And he's talking about AB 205, the domestic partnership law, and he says, quote, "By signing this bill, Governor Gray Davis honored all California families and reinforced the message that intolerance stops at the California border." So there. It's true that there were those in the LGBT community who viewed AB 205 as honoring all families, correct?
As opposed to the pre-existing status, then yes, it was an increase in the affirmation in state protections afforded them.
Your Honor, we would move the admission of DIX 1068.
And no objection, Your Honor.
1068 is admitted.
Turning your attention to the next tab, which is tab 69A, this is DIX 1453. It's a press release from the National Center for Lesbian Rights against pertaining to AB 205. And it says in the first sentence, "The National Center for Lesbian Rights hailed today's historic signing by Governor Davis of AB 205, a groundbreaking bill that would grant same-sex couples most of the rights, benefits, and responsibilities granted to spouses under state law." So there were prominent members of the LGBT community who hailed the passage of AB 205, correct?
That certainly seems to be the case, yes.
Your Honor, we would move the admission of DIX 1453.
No objection.
Very well.
Now, you also, thank you, Your Honor. You also testified, Professor, about initiatives. And you mentioned you had some statistics about the percentages of initiatives that had targeted gays and lesbians and how many had passed and not. And do you know how many of those initiatives were held in California?
Several. I don't know the exact
Well,
number.
do you know the percentage of initiatives pertaining to gays and lesbians that were held in California that targeted the gay and lesbian community and that passed?
No. Since I don't know the exact number in California, I can't compute this, the percentage.
Okay. I didn't know whether you knew the percentage or not. All right. Now, let's turn to PX, the next tab in your binder, which is tab 70. It's called Lose, Win, or Draw, a re-examination of direct democracy and minority rights. And this is PX 839. This is a document you considered in reaching your opinions in this case, correct?
It is.
And if we look behind the tab B, which is behind here, is that the supplemental appendix to this article?
It appears to be.
Have you made any attempt to analyze whether the gay and lesbian community in California has done better in recent initiatives than it did, say, in the 70s or 80s?
No, I didn't disaggregate the initiatives over time.
Your Honor, we would move the admission of PX 839 with the supplementation of the appendix. The version of the exhibit that plaintiffs created did not have the actual data of the referenda that were included and underlay the analysis. So we would request leave to supplement this PX 839 with the appendix.
No objection, Your Honor.
Very well. Is supplemental 839 admitted?
Now, I would like to turn your attention to tab 71A, and this is an excerpt from a preface to Democratic Theory by Robert Dahl. And that's the same Dahl to whom you referred yesterday, correct?
It is.
All right. Now, if we turn to page 30, which is the second page of the exhibit, he says in the first full paragraph, because majorities are likely to be unstable and transitory in a large and pluralistic society, they are likely to be politically ineffective. And herein lies the basic protection against their exploitation of minorities. This conclusion is, of course, scarcely compatible with the preoccupation with majority tyranny that is the hallmark of the Madisonian style of thought. And don't we see this principle at work in places like New Hampshire and Vermont, where the legislature is passing same-sex marriage laws precisely because the heterosexual community is not monolithically opposed to same-sex marriage rights?
I know, Mr. Thompson, that the state of Maine didn't enter your description of states that passed it legislatively, and I think it's illustrative. So the paragraph, the one paragraph out of the book that you're reading, suggests that that majorities are inherently unstable and that majorities come and go. And indeed, one of the central principles of Madisonian protectionism, one of the arguments Dahl makes in favor of pluralism is that majorities are momentary and that they'll fade. So, and indeed, one of the critiques of pluralism by scholars in minority politics, not just in gay and lesbian politics, but of African American politics, and indeed any other minority group, is that on some issues, majorities can be quite stable. So, for example, as I indicated on a national level, it is still the case that more than half of all Americans find that defining characteristics of gays and lesbians, which is same-sex sexual attraction and expression, to be always wrong. Now, you pointed out that that number has actually declined over time, but it is still a majority. I think it's safe to assume that the majority has been in place for an exceedingly long time. The same is true on behalf of African Americans. Whites have been a majority of the population and have held power for a very long period of time. So one of the critiques of Dahl's pluralistic theory, and one of the critiques of his defense of sort of Madisonianism, is that there are some majorities that do not fade. There are some majorities that endure for a very long periods of time. That breaks down rotation in office. And rotation in office is what's supposed to temper, constrain the bad behavior of the majority who might find themselves in the minority at some near future time. So I think this paragraph is completely out of context.
All right. Now, let's turn to back one tab to 71. This is called Gay Rights in the States, Public Opinion and Policy Responsiveness. It's DIX 1105, and this is a document you relied on in reaching your opinions in this case. Is that right?
It is.
All right. And let's turn to page 383. And directing your attention to the right-hand column, the first full paragraph, in the third sentence, it says, "It is also true that gay and lesbian rights are not particularly disadvantaged in states with majoritarian institutions. Having elected courts or direct democracy does not significantly affect the adoption of gay rights policies one way or the other." And you relied on this article in reaching your conclusions in this case, yes or no?
It is, I did. And what Lax and Phillips are speaking of, there is their question, which is, are legislatures more or less likely to adopt the policy? This is not an analysis of whether or not the policy endures.
And, Your Honor, we would move the admission of DIX 1105.
No objection.
Very well. 1105 is admitted.
Now, many times the gay and lesbian community is successful in keeping measures off the ballot, correct?
That implies an agency which I'm not familiar with. So many times, measures that would disadvantage gays and lesbians remain off the ballot. Gays and lesbians may have and likely did play some role in that process. It would depend on the specifics of the process and the question in hand.
Now, again, going back to the political opportunity structure that you described, Was the adoption of Proposition 8 a manifestation of the political obstacles confronted by gays and lesbians in California, in your opinion?
I would say it's certainly a manifestation. It would be one of the results of political powerlessness. Again, as I indicated in the answer to His Honor's question yesterday, a single election result is, or a single piece of legislation should not be considered to be the basis for a conclusion. It's a piece of evidence.
All right. And one of the obstacles that gays and lesbians face in California to realizing same-sex marriage rights is religiously inspired opposition, correct?
I think that that's a national issue. That the religions, quoting the document that you submitted into evidence, that gay and lesbian advocacy organizations think they have a religion problem.
Right. And there are some individuals who voted for Proposition 8 because of Old Testament biblical prohibitions against same-sex sexual contact, correct?
I think that's a fair assumption.
And there are some numbers of individuals who might have voted for Proposition 8 because they believe their churches were going to be compelled to bless same-sex marriages, correct?
I believe that they had been led to believe that. So I think that there is some evidence that that could be true, yes.
And it's possible, in your opinion, that some people voted in favor of Proposition 8 because of the negative reaction to the perception of activist judges, correct?
I would think that that's possible, but less likely. So scholars of American public opinion regularly bemoan the low levels of information that many voters have. It is certainly an argument that has been used by one side of the political spectrum to decree what they see as a form of judicial activism and to make the judiciary a scapegoat for their views. I'm not sure the degree to which that penetrates into the general public. I think many Americans don't fully understand the judicial process or even the judicial appointment process. I am sure that it is the case that somewhere in California, somebody probably voted on the basis of not liking those darn judges. But I can't really speak to what percentage that might be.
All right. Now, in your rebuttal report that you put in this case, you talked about the role of religion and how it may or may not inform views on same-sex marriage, correct?
I did. I was responding to the expert report that had been put in.
And we have decades of research on abortion opinion, social welfare, death penalty suggests that people's religious convictions shape their views of public policy, correct?
I think that's a fair conclusion.
Various measures of religion are a fairly robust predictor of lots of forms of political behavior, correct?
That's correct.
Most scholars of political behavior would suggest that when analyzing not only views about public policy matters, but also partisan identification and candidate preference, that religion is regularly identified as an important factor shaping people's attitudes, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Everything we know about religion, belief, and identity and its role in public policy attitude formation suggests that the plausible interpretation is that religious people vote on religious beliefs, correct?
Mr. Thompson, have you switched sides? Yes, I think that's correct.
The notion that deeply religious people do not rely on those religious beliefs when formulating attitudes about the world strikes you as deeply unlikely and unreasonable, correct?
Yes. But I want to put that in the context in which it was written. So the expert report to which I was replying suggested that there was an alternative explanation, which was that increasing levels of religion or religious observance was connected to a non-religious reason for voting for the proposition, and no evidence was presented. And my response was that I found that logic kind of wanting. That if we show that people with higher levels of religious observance or more orthodox levels of religious observance, religious belief, are more likely to disfavor same-sex marriage. Then, when we might logically conclude that those religious beliefs affected their vote on election day, as opposed to some third intervening reason, which would be secular.
Now, if you were asked to identify the percentage of those who voted in favor of Proposition 8 because of their religious convictions, it would be difficult to arrive at a specific scientific estimate, correct?
Well, of course, there are always uncertainty around estimates of social phenomenon. There would be a variety of ways to go about doing it as a social scientist, including the use of polling, survey experiments, lab experiments. We could look at sort of campaign messaging. There are discourse theorists who would look at that language that people used. So there's a variety of scientific methodologies that we could use to determine that distribution of votes if we had, sufficient time and resources to conduct that study.
But you don't have an opinion as to whether a majority of those who voted in favor of Proposition 8 did so because of their religious conviction, correct?
I don't know that I could make a numerical point estimation. I just don't know. I just don't have the basis to make that claim.
But you don't even have an opinion. Forgetting whether it's a specific numerical point, you don't know whether it's greater than 50%, correct?
I don't have the basis to make an estimate, which I would need to do to decide if it's greater than or less than or equal to 50.
Now, members of the religious denominations voted strongly in favor of Proposition 8, correct?
That appears to be the case.
Members of the Mormon faith voted in favor of Proposition 8, correct?
That sounds plausible.
And a large majority of evangelical Christians opposed same-sex marriage, correct?
I believe that's true, yes.
And you believe that the correlation between religious denomination and attitudes about same-sex marriage is sufficiently high that it's reasonable to assume that religion is a motivating force for many voters, correct?
So, actually, I looked at a variety of religious factors. So there are differences across religious identification. There's also differences across the frequency of participation, so church attendance. There's also differences across the importance someone attaches to the religion in their everyday life and beliefs about whether or not the Bible is the literal word of God. So there are a variety of religious dimensions that we could look at to assess religiosity, for lack of a better term. And across all those dimensions, the ones that I identified in my report, there is a positive association with the religiosity and unhappiness with or opposition to same-sex marriage. On the sectarian issue, I illustrated that there were different distributions for different sectarian identifications. And some sects are more vehemently opposed and some sects are more mixed. And in some sects, it's not an issue at all.
All right, now let's turn your attention to your rebuttal report. It had been tab 2, but I moved it after tab 72 so that we wouldn't have to flip back. So it should be right there after tab 72. Do you see it, sir?
I'm sorry, under tab 72?
Keep going, one more.
72A.
Yes, okay. Now, do you see your rebuttal report?
I do.
Okay, now this is PX 827, and turning your attention to page 13 of the rebuttal report. This is a chart that shows, actually we need to look, I guess first at page 12, where we can see what the columns mean. Column 1 is support for no recognition of same-sex relationships. Column 2 is support for civil unions, and column 3 is support for same-sex marriage, correct?
That's correct.
And then it's broken down by religious denomination, is that correct?
It is.
And if we turn to the next page, we can see that 0% of the Muslim community supported same-sex marriage, correct?
That's correct, but there's only 5 observations in the data set.
Now, this is the data set you selected, correct?
Yes, it's the National Election Study. So we examined in 2008, there were approximately 2,350 complete interviews, and Muslims are a very small percentage of the United States. So as you get to smaller and smaller denominations, the distributions will be less reliable. Indicative, but with a very large confidence interval around them.
Is it reasonable to assume that there is a connection between the Muslim faith and opposition to same-sex marriage?
I think it would be fair to say that same-sex marriage would be inconsistent with observant Muslim belief.
And turning your attention to the table in your report, it shows 0% of Hindus support same-sex marriage, correct?
That's correct.
And is it reasonable to assume that there's a connection between the faith of the Hindu community and their opposition to same-sex marriage?
Again, the number of observations is approximately 6 in the data set, but I would think that that's a reasonable suspicion. Again, with a very large confidence interval around the estimates.
All right. If we look up to the top of the page, we see that the Quakers, 100% of them supported same-sex marriage, correct?
All 3 of them supported same-sex marriage, yes.
It's your data set. Do you know of any better data?
On this?
Yes.
No.
Well, you use the best data that's available. According to the best data available, 100% of the Quakers supported same-sex marriage, correct?
Yes, they did.
All right. And is it reasonable to assume that there is a correlation between their religious faith and their position on same-sex marriage?
Among the very small subsection of the population, it would seem to be the case that their religiosity leads them to a different conclusion, yes.
And then if we look back to page 11, to the table there, which lists Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, and other, if we look at the Jewish community, 80% of the Jewish community support same-sex marriage, correct?
That's correct.
So it's reasonable to assume that some members of the Jewish faith support same-sex marriage because of their religious conviction, correct?
That's a little bit harder to determine because I would want to look at the question of the other measure of religiosity. So frequency of religious attendance, literal interpretation of the Bible with regard to that community. I believe that certainly among the Reformed Jewish communities, their religion is, as I understand it, silent on the question of same-sex relationships. Now, I'm not an expert on the internal religious beliefs of various Jewish denominations.
Is it conceivable that some number of religious people in California honestly believe that Proposition 8 prioritized the rights of children over the competing rights of gay people? And I'd like a yes or no answer.
Yes.
Okay, and let's look at religious resources. Do you know how much money members of the Roman Catholic Church donated to Proposition 8?
I don't have an exact estimate. Some of the documents that we went through in yesterday's testimony made reference to very large donations by Knights of Columbus and by the Catholic community. I believe that the summary comment from the Protect Marriage organizers were that the Catholic community had really stepped up. But the exact number associated with the total, I don't know. I know the Knights of Columbus donation was 1.15 million.
Now, you haven't been able to examine any of the internal documents of the Episcopal Church in this case, have you?
I have not.
So you don't know how much money Episcopalians donated to defeat Proposition 8, correct?
No.
With respect to the Mormon faith, you don't have a rough sense as to how many organizers there were of the Mormon faith who supported Proposition 8, correct?
How many organizers?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. No. I mean, could you define organizer at what level?
Well, we talked about the organizational structure. Why don't I ask it this way? You don't know approximately how many members of the Mormon faith campaigned in support of Proposition 8, correct?
The document I read into evidence yesterday suggests that the Mormon Church itself believed it had 20,000 volunteers on several weekends. I have no reason to doubt them.
Now, you have seen, or have you seen any internal documents relating to the Episcopal Church on how many volunteers they had?
I have not.
Okay. And you don't know how many members of the Catholic faith campaigned in support of Proposition 8, correct?
I don't.
And you don't know how many members of the Jewish faith campaigned against Proposition 8, correct?
I have no idea.
Okay. And have you made any attempt to consider the size of the religious events held in opposition to Proposition 8?
I raised that issue in my rebuttal report to Professor Nathanson because he identifies a list of events that took place in opposition to Proposition 8 without considering the events in favor. I don't know the size of the events in opposition or the events in favor, though I'm told that the event in the Qualcomm Stadium was quite large. But again, I don't know the exact numbers.
Now, let's look at your rebuttal report and page 15.
Back on what tab again?
So this is tab 72A.
Page 15 in the tables?
In the tables, yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay. And we can see that for those who never attend religious service, 48% of them oppose same-sex marriage, correct?
That's correct.
And so there are reasons wholly apart from religious conviction that some people voted in favor of Proposition 8, correct?
I would not dispute that.
And conceivably, there are some individuals who themselves are not religious, but who believe marriage is a religious and only a religious institution, correct?
That's conceivable.
Okay, now, I'd like to switch topics.
Before perhaps we can get the witness to explain this table, I frankly don't understand it.
Okay?
There are a bunch of numbers here, and if we're going to have these tables referred to in evidence, it would be helpful for the finder of fact to understand them.
Yes, Your Honor. Professor, would you please explain for the record how each of these 4 tables, what the methodology was, and what they purport to represent?
Okay, so turning back to Table 1, Your Honor, on page 11.
Yes, sir.
The American National Election Study asks religion in 2 consecutive questions. The first is they asked a broad identification question, what you see reported in Table 1, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, and all the others. And then among the groups, they then probe about individual sectarian identity. So the others are asked, well, which other, and the Protestants are asked which Protestant faith. And so we move from the first table to the second table, which becomes more specific.
Let's go back to table 1,
Well,
okay?
Okay,
We have columns 1, 2, and 3,
that's correct.
and they are labeled no recognition, civil unions, marriage.
That's right. So
So how do I read that?
So the respondents were asked, when confronting the question of government recognition of same-sex unions, do you favor full marriage equality? Civil union institution, which has some of the responsibilities and rights of marriage, or no legal recognition? I can't tell you that that's a verbatim repeat of the question, Your Honor, but it's pretty close. And so each respondent is allowed to say, well, I'm opposed to all government recognition, I favor civil unions but not marriage, or I favor full marriage equality. So what the percentages are in each of those columns are the percentages of respondents who fell into each of those categories across that row. The first number in each cell is the number of respondents. The reason that number is fractional is because simply weighting is applied to make sure that the sample is representative. Yeah. The numbers, if they were not weighted, would be very similar, but that would be rounded off to full persons, obviously.
So I read that first table, table 1, column 3, row 1, to mean that 24% of Protestants favor recognition of same-sex marriage,
That's correct.
and 28% favor civil unions, 47+% no recognition at all.
That's correct, Your Honor, and so forth through that table on the second table.
All right, now what about the third table?
The table 3 asks the question about how important is religion in your daily life? And the response options available are very much, quite a bit, somewhat, or not at all. So what I'm trying to do there is to look at the respondent's self-attributed religiosity. So how much does religion affect my life? And across the top is the same 3 response possibility. So for people for whom religion is not important in their daily life, about 60.5% favor marriage rights. So that's the first row. The third column, 60.4. Among people for whom religion is very important, part of their daily life, the comparable number is 21.64. So we move from religion being unimportant to religion being very important. Support for same-sex marriage drops by approximately 40 points. Is Your Honor happy with that table?
Well, it's not a question of making me happy.
With the understanding, my apologies, with the understanding of that table.
I think I understand it.
Okay.
And table 4?
So yeah, a political scientist, some some time ago, started to revise the review of religion, in part because the role of religion in public life had become more prominent over the last 20, 30 years or so. And so we started asking additional questions. An additional question, which is the question of biblical literalism. So folks who study religion and politics find that measures of orthodoxy are closely associated with political views. And a key measure of orthodoxy is captured into this question of biblical literalism. So respondents are asked, do you believe in the Bible? Do you believe the Bible is the actual Word of God, the Word of God, but not literally, or that the Bible was written by men? And written by men would be a less orthodox position. And the actual Word of God would be the most orthodox position. So again, the same three categories across the top. So for individuals who believe that the Bible was written by men, 68.5% of them favor same-sex marriage. And for people who believe that the Bible is the actual Word of God, 19.4% of them favor same-sex marriage. So the drop there is approximately 50 points from the least to the most orthodox interpretation of the Bible.
Does your study show what percentage of the respondents believe the Bible was written by man, was the Word of God but not literal, and was the actual Word of God? Break that down.
It does, Your Honor. It's not reported here. A little simple mathematics. So the actual Word of God, there are 801 approximately, 811 cases out of 2,171.
I see.
Roughly speaking, that's about 39% or so. About 40% or so in the Word of God, but not literal, and then the 380. I'm sorry, my math is in my head skills.
All right.
And then the final table is opinion on marriage by frequency of church attendance. I apologize for the pagination. So this is a simple frequency of religious observance, which political scientists and sociologists have found to be quite telling. And so it goes from a high value of more than once weekly. So these are individuals who attend Saturday or Sunday services, as well as perhaps a prayer meeting or Bible study or some sort of religious meeting, all the way down to never. And so for people who never go to work, to church, as Mr. Thompson illustrated, a bare majority, 52.2%, favor same-sex unions. And for
Same-sex unions?
Same-sex marriage. I'm sorry. And for people who only go for a few times per year, again, a bare majority, 51.18%, favor same-sex marriage. When we go to people who go to church more than once weekly, the percentage in favor of same-sex marriage is 11.9%. So you have a drop again of about 40 percentage points from never going to going more than once a week.
Very well. Thank you. Do you want to follow up, Mr. Thompson?
You're welcome, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor, but I would like to move these tables from PX 827 into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor. I believe they are already admitted as Plaintiff's Exhibit 2582, but I have no objection to them going in again for convenience.
Very well.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to switch topics, Professor, and ask some questions about some of the violence and vandalism and harassment that took place during the Proposition 8 campaign. I'd like to direct your attention to tab 73, which is an article written, The Price of Prop 8, and it's DIX 458. And this is a document that collects a variety of sources showing vandalism against supporters of Prop 8, correct?
That's what it purports to be, yes.
And it also collects a variety of publicly reported incidents of violence against supporters of Proposition 8, correct?
Again, I'm just paging through the document. I've seen it once before, but it seems to be what it's claiming to do, yes.
Your Honor, we would move the admission of DIX 458.
Your Honor, I object on grounds that it's beyond the scope of this witness's testimony, and that it's a hearsay document, and that the events explained in it or reported in it should not be admitted for the truth of the matter asserted.
Didn't the witness testify, or at least touch upon in his testimony, the effect of acts of violence or violence in connection with political campaigns? Didn't he touch upon that subject?
Yes, Your Honor, and on hate crimes.
Hate crimes.
And, Your Honor, he specifically addressed the fact that the Civil Rights Act 1964 was attributable in large fact. Points to the fact that CBS broadcast the attack on the Selma Bridge, and he testified to hate crimes. And we will submit that some of the materials we're about to walk through fit his definition of a hate crime as intended to intimidate people who supported Prop 8. And it goes to his conception of political opportunity structure. He testified how in the civil rights community, one of the tactics you can have is to appeal to a norm of fairness. But he said the moment you resort to violence, your ability to appeal to a norm of fairness dissipates. So this evidence relates to that testimony too.
I understand, but it's still hearsay. But I think it's probably appropriate, given that he's offering opinion testimony, therefore the objection will be overruled and 458 will be admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. We would now like permission to publish on the screen DIX 2616.
Mr. Thompson, is there a tab associated with that?
No, it's something we want to put on the screen.
Is it already in evidence?
No, Your Honor. We thought it might be well to play it, and if there is an objection, so that
What are
they
we
can
about to watch?
Well, it's a short minute and 24-second news story that recounts some of the violent activities that took place in connection with Proposition 8. It relates to the subject matters that were just that are covered in the Heritage Foundation project.
I would lodge the same objection on hearsay grounds, Your Honor. I'm not sure what is about to be played, but happy to see it and let the court make its decision.
Well, if you're happy, that seems to be the standard.
Happiness, yes.
Now, when people see a video with an elderly lady with a bandage over her eye because she put a yes on 8 sign on her front yard, does it have the potential to diminish support for the political goals of the LGBT community?
Well, it is certainly an inflammatory image. It is certainly not an image that would be desirable by anyone associated with the campaign. I'm a little taken aback because the report suggests that these are neighbors with long-standing problems, and so I don't know the specifics of the case. I don't know if the person was convicted of any crime. We didn't hear the other person's story. So I can't attribute any veracity to the incident, but I can tell you that the particular news story would not have been favorable to the opponents of Proposition 8.
Your Honor, we would move the admission of DIX 2616.
I object to its admission, Your Honor, irrelevant and hearsay. The reporter noted the individual who's being interviewed said he thought it was because the other guy put up a Prop 8 sign, and he had a Prop 8 sign. Didn't seem to me that there was a foundation laid, even by the reporter, for what prompted this altercation between two neighbors who had had fights before in any event. I find it difficult to conceive of how it's relevant to the issue in this case.
Well, we're not here adjudicating what happened in San Diego at this particular time. The witness's testimony is about the impact politically of reports of this kind, and so for that purpose, I think the video is admissible. Once again, it's DIX
2616.
2616. Very well, it will be admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Professor, I'd like to turn your attention to tab 74 in your binder, and this is a story that comes from the SanDiego6.com website. It's dated November 4th, 2008, and here's what it says. Disputes over Proposition 8 campaign signs in Carlsbad left one man behind bars on suspicion of assault and at least one other alleged assailant at large Tuesday, authorities reported. The latter of the two scuffles over the ballot measure which would ban same-sex marriage in California occurred about 10 a.m. when a jogger spotted two men removing yes on 8 signs in the area of Aviaria Parkway and Cormorant Drive. Police spokeswoman Lynn Diamond said. When the witness confronted the thieves, one of them pulled off the witness' hat and smashed his eyeglasses on the ground. The attacker's large black and tan dog then bit the victim in his upper leg, causing deep puncture wounds, according to Diamond. At that point, the assailant, a man who appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s, wearing shorts and a polo shirt, ran off along with his companion, who was also leading a dog. Is this the sort of incident that, when people read about this on the internet, would have the potential to diminish political support for the LGBT community?
Objection, Your Honor. Vague, ambiguous question.
Objection overruled.
Once again, not speaking to the specifics of the report, any adverse publicity associated with one side or the other would be detrimental to their cause, and apparently in this case detrimental to Carlsbad.
Your Honor, we would move the admission of DIX 1725.
Same objection as to relevance and hearsay, Your Honor.
Very well, I'll admit it.
Turning to tab 75, this is a story from October 13th from the International Business Times. And in the, it's entitled, Prop 8, Supporter Violently Attacked for Disturbing Lawn Signs. And in the second paragraph, it says, Prop 8 supporter Jose Nunez, 37, was brutally assaulted while waiting to distribute yard signs to other supporters of the initiative after church services at the St. Stanislas Parish in Modesto. The assailant grabbed about 75 signs and yelled at Nunez accusingly, "What do you have against gays?" Although Nunez replied that he had nothing against gays, he was attacked anyway. The assailant punched Nunez in the left eye and ran off with the signs. And in this, again, the sort of story that would have the potential to diminish support for the gay and lesbian political movement.
Objection, Your Honor. Irrelevant, hearsay, cumulative.
Objection overruled.
Potentially, though I don't know what the readership of the International Business Times is in the California electorate. I'm not familiar with the publication, and the source of the story is protectmarriage.com. It's sourced on the bottom of the press release.